All right, so whenever you go into Schoology, you go into the Literature, NonFiction Selection 1 folder. These videos up here are just some little insight. They don't necessarily play into the actual cubing and chunking. So the first thing that I want you to do is click on the NF number 1 article for cubing and chunking. Now, what you are going to do is you are going to go back and open up the nonfiction number 1, Aaron Ralston. This is your worksheet. So we have your article, and then we will also have your worksheet. Okay, so first we're going to chunk, then we're going to come back and we're going to cube. And the cubing steps are all listed on this first page for steps 2 and steps 3. Before we start reading, we need to fill out this top heading right here. Okay, so we know that our selection is called Climber Who Cut Off Hand Looks Back. So you would type in this right here, Climber Who Cut Off Hand Looks Back. That's your title. Okay, it tells us the medium. It is an article printed interview. That's our medium. And then it also tells us the source. It tells us that it came from National Geographic. It tells us who wrote it, and it tells us the date. So we need to note National Geographic, Michael Benoist, and August 30th, 2004. Okay, so our top part is done now. Now we are ready to read and chunk. So what we do with chunking is you are only going to read one chunk at a time. This is chunk 1. So you're only going to read that chunk. You're going to highlight any important information. Important information would be especially names, dates, locations, and big events that happened. All right, so those are things that you're going to want to highlight. For instance, some things you might highlight in chunk 1. April 2003, Aaron Ralston, Utah's Blue John Canyon. 800-pound boulder shifted, crushed his hand, pinned him to the canyon wall. A few things I would also notate. 6 days. Dehydration and hypothermia. Using a multi-tool, amputated right hand repelled to freedom. In that last little bit, I would also note Between a Rock and a Hard Place. That would be the book that he ended up writing after his accident. So once you have chunk 1 highlighted, not everything in chunk 1 is going to be highlighted, just the important stuff. Then you're going to go back to this worksheet and you're going to summarize in 3 bullets. Now, you're not just going to pick 3 things that you highlighted from chunk 1. You're going to summarize all of those things into 3 bullets. So for the first thing, you might say on chunk 1, for the first bullet, maybe you would want to write down April 2003, Aaron Ralston, Utah's Blue John Canyon. The second bullet for chunk 1, trapped by 800-pound boulder for 6 days. And then the third bullet for chunk 1, wrote a book. Okay, so those would be all valid points. And again, that only goes in chunk 1 right here. Then you're ready to go back to the article and read chunk 2. You can highlight stuff in the question. In this question, I would actually highlight start cutting. In his answer, I would highlight sleep deprived. Result of decisions I had made. Chose to go out there by myself. Chose to not tell anyone where I was going. Chose to not go with 2 climbers. Choices up to that point had helped me survive. Took responsibility of getting myself out. And then in that second bit for chunk 2, in this second question here, some things that you might highlight here. Sever his own hand. I think that's important to note in the question. In his answer, you might highlight strange, entered a flow state, not thinking ahead, thinking about what's in front of you each second. So engrossed, I had to catch myself when I got to the arteries so that I didn't sever those without a tourniquet on. Again, you're not necessarily highlighting complete sentences, just phrases, bits, and pieces of what you think is important. So then, once you're done highlighting chunk 2, go back and summarize it here in 3 bullet points for chunk 2. All right, so you're going to do all of that back and forth. Read chunk 3, go back and summarize it in the chunk 3 box. Once you have that done, once you are completely done with the chunking portion, with all of this right here, you're done with that, submit your article. You're done with it. You've summarized it, and everything you need to know about the article is right here in this top part. Now you're ready for cubing. So on cubing, notice there are 6 bullet points. You're going to summarize and describe each box. So look at box 1, summarize it, write it out. Doesn't have to be complete sentences. Chunk 2, summarize it, write it out, and so on and so forth for all 6 chunks. That's describing. That's how you write a paper. You highlight, you chunk it, and then you put it all together in your own words. And that's what you're going to be doing for describe. Again, it doesn't have to be in complete sentences, though. As far as compare and contrast, back in that nonfiction folder, the NonFiction Selection 1 folder, I gave you a video to compare and contrast it to. You're going to watch that. You're going to come back in here and you're going to tell me that you are comparing this to Nick Berg from Unbroken. And Unbroken should be underlined. It is a title of a movie. Then you need to give me similarities. Think simple. Sorry, I said Nick Berg. It should be Louis Zamperini. Sorry about that. For compare and contrast, the plus sign is similarities. What do they have in common? For instance, they both suffered. They both survived. They're both strong-willed Americans. They both never gave up. They're both portrayed as heroes. You could list any of those. And then think of their differences. One happened in Japan. One happened in Utah. One was a prisoner of war. One was a hiker. They happened in different time periods. Okay, so that's cubing level 2, compare and contrast. For analyze, and like I said on this first page up here, it gives you questions to ask yourself to help you answer these. So for analyze, what are the component parts? How does it function? The way that we do analyze is we list out 5 events. Nope, I thought we did 6. Maybe I only made you do 5. 5 events from a timeline. So you might say, all right, so the article was written the accident happened in 2003 when did not prepare well for hike. That's definitely our starting point. Our ending point then would be 2004 when the interview and article happened. Now we have to think of points in between this. So we might say trapped in canyon, severed arm, and repelled to freedom. If I could spell. Wrote a book. Wrote a book is definitely important because he would not have had the interview and the article done had he not written the book about his experience. So analyze is a timeline of events. Think of the very first thing that happened, not necessarily in the article, and then the very last thing, which in this case was the article, the interview. Then we have to think about what can we do with this? So back to analyze. How does this function? Some things we might say. It could be used as promotional. It could be used as entertainment. It could be used for lessons to be learned. Those are all important things to note. Then we are ready for cubing number 4, apply. Apply tells us to think. How does it work? What can you do with it? So how does it work? What can you do with it? The article as a whole. What could we do with it? You yourself, what could you do with it? You could share it, maybe research it, and you could learn from it. Those are all 3 important things that you could do with the article. And then on to synthesize. Synthesize tells us, what can it be combined with? How can we add something to it to make it better? So what could Aaron Ralston have done to make this better? He could have planned better. He could have told someone before he went out. He could have taken a first aid kit with a better knife, with more food, with more water, taken a GPS tracker, taken a flare. Lots of things that he could have added to his situation to make them go better. So that would be synthesize. And then step 6 is completely on your own. For cubing, take a stand. Explain why you're for or against it. So are you yes for the article, because you think it's a great way for people to learn from somebody else's mistakes and not make the same mistake again? Any other reasons? Maybe you're against the article. Maybe they're highlighting a situation that shouldn't be highlighted. Maybe you think he's giving himself a pat on the back and you don't think he should. Maybe you're just not a fan of it. Yes or no, and tell me why for argue. All right? And these are going to be the same steps that you're going to take on every chunking and cubing nonfiction selection that we do from here on out. We've got 2 or 3 more that we will be working on. So you'll become very familiar with this process. Don't be afraid to ask questions and let me know if you need anything.